Really excited to be here today to talk about the information distribution in Web3. This is Joshua from RSS3. Basically, as the name suggests, we are the feed protocol of Web3. And apparently, what we work on is all about information distribution. And I think in all era of the internet, if you look at the history, information distribution has always been one of the most challenging, yet one of the most exciting fields to be working on. Of course, apparently we had the original feed RSS, the original RSS, which was in a way the first and the only distribution protocol that got massive adoption in the era of Web 1. And of course, it was in a way affected and some would say defeated by centralized services in the era of Web 2, whereas information distribution were dominated by services like Twitter, Facebook, and other centralized services. And Web3 is expected to be the open web. And what's interesting about Web3 is that it, in a way, combines the openness and permissionlessness of Web 1 with the ease of use of Web 2. And if we look at the landscape of how we want to sort of form the way people process information in the era of Web 3, it's gonna be logically, in terms of information flow, would be similar with what happened in Web 1 or Web 2, but apparently would be done in different ways. But let's start by looking at the characteristics of Web 3. I think a lot of different people would have very different perspectives on this part of the sort of the understanding. What we at RSS3 believe the most important characteristics of Web3 are openness, democratic governing, and centralized control. They are, in a way, very straightforward for people who have been working in the industry for a longer time. But for the sake of whoever that's not very familiar with the field, I'm going to talk a little bit about these ideologies. I think open here basically means openness in terms of open source, openness in terms of permissionless, whereas, if a piece of data, a group of networks or just a specific protocol should be open to everyone without discrimination. And of course, open also means modularization, whereas all protocols and applications should be interchangeable and interoperable. And secondly, democratic governing is also very straightforward, as if we think about a centralized service, all of the information, all of the decisions are actually made by a central party, and in a lot of cases, one person. Whereas in a decentralized network, we would expect a lot of decisions to be made by a collective effort, which is, in a way, interpreted as democracy. And of course, the third one is centralized control, whereas it's actually the backbone of a democratic governing. Basically, if the control is decentralized, there wouldn't be one center that could, do things that are really bad for the system, or anything that would greatly harm the benefit or the profit of other people. So, with these in mind, as the most important characteristics of Web3, we would assume and expect that information distribution of Web3 would follow all of these characteristics. And with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about information flow itself. So, as I said before, information flow itself never changes. If you think of, how humans or any type of creature, how they deal with information, there are always these four processes. If you look at, language itself, later on you get letters, and then you get things like telephone, video calls, or things like TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. All of these things actually would start with the composition of that piece of information, right? And then that information would be stored somewhere in a specific way in the nature with a chip on a server. And later on, that information will be distributed in a way through a media to the targeted location, and it will be rendered by the receiver. So this information flow in Web 2 was mostly done through one application, or at most a series of applications that is basically basically products of one company. Let's just say TikTok. If you want to compose a piece of video on TikTok, you basically have to do it on TikTok, and your information will be stored on TikTok server, and the algorithm and the social graph on TikTok will help you to distribute all of these videos to other people. And on the client, the TikTok client, the video will be rendered to whoever is actually looking at your video. And in Web3, we would expect things to happen in different ways. As I said before, it should be open in terms of modularization. It should be more of a democratic way with decentralized control. And so we would expect these to happen in different layers, right? The composition, the storage, the distribution, the rendering, all of these on different layers. Everyone can choose to work with each other. Developers can build with all the modules they want. They can, use one module to work with another, and they can always choose leave and go. And of course, users have all the rights regarding their data. And here I do have one of the examples that I could show to kind of clarify what it means by all of these 4 layers. If we look at the on my left hand, that's mirror.xyz, the publishing site. What it does basically is it helps users to create a piece of information, right? It has kind of logics to help you create rich text, to help you get stuff into NFTs and help you to do a lot of things. And then that piece of information, in this case, will be stored on Arweave, which is the decentralized blockchain for file storage. And these information on Arweave will later on be indexed and distributed by RSS3, which is mainly the result of RSS3 distribution is going to be something like a feed file, which is structured, really easy to use, and aggregated. And then a renderer, a decentralized renderer like Mask, is going to have different ways to kind of show that piece of information to, in a way, help users to view that piece of information in a very different way. So you can think of Web3, if you look at these 4 projects, they are developed by very, very different teams, right? They have teams from Asia, they have teams from Europe, they have teams from America, and all of these teams work together, not in a cooperation way. They don't actually cooperate in a way. They don't RSS3 doesn't go to Arweave and say, okay, can you give me the API so that you can allow me to actually work with these information? And Max doesn't come to RSS3 to get that information. I mean, well, they do in a technological way, but they don't actually come to the team. So these 4 projects, they work together in a very, very permissionless way. And every one of these could be changed by anything. Say, Mirror could, right? Just store their articles on IPFS, whereas RSS3 could still get the information from IPFS. And the same logic applies to all of the different layers. They have to be always interchangeable. If we look at a centralized system right now, how information flows, it's something like this. So basically a creator creates some kind of content which will be stored on a platform, what we call is a platform-centric system. And that platform, let's still have TikTok as an example, in which case the content is apparently the videos. That platform will have that video and distribute these videos in channels that you don't know, in ways that you don't know. Of course, you could say some of them use social graphs, but a lot of them do use things like algorithms, recommendation algorithms, to kind of make it, they say, better. So users, on the other hand, only have the right to view that content. Creators doesn't really, they can't control their data, and users can't control the channels. Well, in a way they can choose whom to follow, but these information are actually stored on the platform. So technically, all the channels are controlled by the platform as well. So the distribution, information distribution, in terms of a Web2, or what we call centralized system, is very much like something of this diagram. If we think about the fundamentals, if we look at the fundamentals of how we want this whole thing to be, or we try to sort of apply all the characteristics of Web3, as we talked about before, into information distribution, we would have two of the very important features, or characteristics for information distribution in Web3. And the first one is about creators having a complete and thorough right in terms of controlling every bit of their content. They are the creator of that content. They should be entitled with all the right, and they are not bounded by any platform. And secondly, users should have the right to control what kind of channel to use and where they want to use the channels. If we look at most of the popular channels in terms of information distribution, social graphs, search engines, recommendation systems, all of these things should be open source, should be transparent, and at the same time, users should be able to control all of these, and they have to have the right to take all their channels to the different place. So if we have these kind of, ideologies in mind, we would have something called a user-centric system. Whereas creators, actually, they would be having all their content as part of them. And then users, though through applications, will have their own channels to get these data, to get this content from creators. Applications should merely be the media for users to utilize these channels that they actually brought in the first place. And this is a very dramatic change, because in this system, all the applications that used to handle, what we call like all the four processes of the information flow, should and will be handling only one, which is rendering, right? However, if we look at like what people do in these days, what applications do in these days, we would know that there is very, very little distinction between users and creators now, right? If you look at Twitter, if you look at Facebook, basically everyone is composing, and at the same time everyone is consuming. So something that's more like a social media, or more like a sort of like a everyone can read and write kind of thing, would be like this. Whereas every user controls their content, and at the same time every user would be utilizing an application as a media to use their own channels to sort of get information, right? So this way, users would be creating a specific piece of information with an application, apparently in the composition layer, the first layer, stores it on a decentralized service, which would be the second layer, decentralized storage, and then have that piece of information distributed in a transparent, decentralized way to any other user who will be using a client which is transparent as well, open, and has some very sophisticated logic in terms of how they could interpret that piece of data. And I think this is how we imagine the future would be, and especially in terms of information distribution. Lots of innovations are happening. I think we have seen like so many great applications, so many great protocols in terms of experimenting something like this, and they are very, very different approaches. If you look at things like Big Cloud or DSO, they will use a parallel internet kind of approach to make that happen. They have their own separated sort of kingdom, but still in a decentralized way. And also, you have people working on a more of a modularization kind of way, like RS3, like Mirror. But I think one of the really great things is that all these things follow the fundamental architecture or the fundamental characteristics of Web3. And preferably, we would see some of the process would fail, some of the process would succeed, but preferably, we would see all the Web3 applications and protocols would actually win against Web2 in a more healthy, beneficial way to all human beings. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this presentation. I would love to talk with you more about content, information distribution, and Web3 in general. So you can find me at joshua@rc3.io. And of course, if you're interested in what RC3 does, always feel free to go to rc3.io. We have blogs, we have all different informations. And thank you. Yeah, have a nice day.